So it's been no videos for a hot minute, and really there's a reason why. We've been redoing the church office, and I've had this frustration at my house that sometimes I can come up with a really great look, and then sometimes I can't. And so I'm about to show you why I care about what we've done. I said we've been redoing the church offices. We moved from the church building into a parsonage that we had across the street from the church. And this is now, let me flip the screen around. This is now my new office. And it's almost done. Almost. I need to put another one of the white ones right there because that's just not big enough. But anyway, that's a lot of complicated conversation. But I want to make a video today about something that I've been thinking about for a long time. And I've been talking about this so much. And we've done a lot of videos about specific Bible translations and Bibles and that sort of thing. I'm not prepared. I'm putting my mount on my camera right now. But I've been holding off tons of content because I've been wanting to really talk about my whole thing about translations and what that is and what that looks like and why that kind of affects the way I think about Bibles. And so I realized that today, is the perfect time to have that kind of translation conversation about the things that I look for in translations, the things that I care about when I think about translations. And let's move this over. Yeah, first video in the new office. I kind of like it. It's a little bit more honest. My office, this is the cleanest you might ever see it. But just to talk about the way that I'd handle translations and a couple of just personal rules I have, but I break every one of these single rules. And so to start off on it is this. I am always going to be a fan of what brings more people together than I am being a fan of what continues to segment us off into just different little tribes and things. And the Christian church has become extremely fractured in the last 20 or 30 years. And one of the things I think for a long time that held us together was the idea of our translations, because we only use a couple of translations. I've got a couple of them here. There was a point in time where everybody just rocked this guy right here. This is a super old Zondervan King James. This is actually my uncle's. I got his name right there. That's kind of cool. Does anybody else collect family Bibles? Is that a big thing to anybody else? I just find those to be cool. You had the Revised Standard Version. This is one I used in seminary when I had a class that required us to carry a Revised Standard Version. I cannot find my American Standard Version. But for a long time in the 20th century, you just had really three translations: King James Version, American Standard Version, Revised Standard Version, and then everything has started exploding out. And I think that some of these original translations that you see come out of the 1960s forward were really great translations, and they did not break the rules. But this is it. So this is kind of my whole rules with translations, or really what I look for or what I hope for. Number one is this. I think translations should be designed to be used by the largest amount of people. And I think that translations, that my favorite translations I've noticed are the ones that absolutely fill a void that were out there. I'm not the biggest New American Standard person, but it was an update of the American Standard Version. It came out in the 70s by the Lockman Foundation, and it was super popular because it's super literal, word for word. Some people will use the term wooden to talk about it, but the New American Standard, it filled a hole. People wanted an extremely accurate but updated to modern language translation of the Bible, hitting into that whole word for word thing. The Living Bible, the original Living Bible back in the 70s, I got a couple of them here. They're all kind of fun. They're all puffy. Oh, this is actually a New American Standard Bible. I lied to you on the YouTube. I'm sorry about that. Yeah, it's right there. Living Bible, old school Living Bible. Paraphrase, that's a dirty word to some people, but it's like every single thing. This is my mom's Bible. She got this in 1974 from my cousin Kenny. You know, a lot of times people talk about this, but the Living Bible like absolutely changed the game back in the 70s because it's about accessibility. As I said in a previous video, I'll kind of link it up here. My biggest thing, even I might not be the biggest fan of a translation, but I'm not going to be the one to say people aren't encountering and meeting Jesus because of it. And a lot of people, like I think this is probably the Bible of the Jesus movement, which like changed the religious landscape of the West and of the world pretty much. And so there's specific reasons, like why is this translation being translated? Now there are some translations out there that have some kind of sketchy reasons I'm not the biggest fan of. I remember back when I was selling Bibles at an independent Christian bookstore in the early 2000s, we kept getting phone calls from people that were used to using a very specific denominational Sunday school material. And they found out that the translation was changing and they were calling us to find out, do we carry this translation? And we didn't, and so I called my Zondervan rep, who was one of the, that's the big Bible publishing house, and I just said, hey, what can you tell me about this translation? What's going on? He said, well, you know, the specific denomination Sunday school material for years came in either King James or New International Version, another like translated for a specific reason translation. And he said it really what's going on is their publishing costs, having to pay the rights for the NIV, are just so radically high. The publishing house has commissioned its own translation. Now, I'm not going to tell you which translation that is, and that's happened 2 or 3 times, and I'm not going to dog on those translations, but if you're literally translating a Bible for the sake of getting like out of paying royalty fees for Sunday school literature, that sort of thing, that's a little sketchy in my book. And so that first one is this: why is this Bible being translated? Is this translation filling in a massive gap? I love the New Living Translation, not a secret whatsoever at all. And I love the New Living Translation because we needed a thought for thought, an easy to understand translation with a high level of scholastic aptitude and input for people. And there's a lot of other Bibles around the same time that were being translated. They were all hitting that. I think I remember it being like a 4th grade reading level. But New Living Translation does not, you don't feel like a 4th grader when you're reading it. Some of those other ones, you kind of feel like you're reading a little bit more of a low-key translation. So that first one is this: why is this Bible being translated? My second rule is this. Earlier this week on Facebook, a friend of mine asked an open-ended question on his page about a specific Bible translation that I had never actually heard of before. And it's a new translation. It's just now coming out, so I think the Psalms and the New Testament's available. And he was wanting a nicer Bible to kind of enter this next stage of life. And he said, I had been using this and I've used this before, but I'm thinking about getting one of these. And I'd never heard of it, so I kind of did some quick research. And then the comment that I left on his page was, hey, I'm not sure what this is, but every single person that is on the translation team for this comes out of the exact same place. Like they were all at the exact same college and seminary, that's that second rule. Like, okay, how wide of an idea or how wide of a theological understanding of a translation philosophy, how wide of just the interpretive things that they're going to bring to the text, that whole 9 yards. Like, how is this a very narrowly defined group of folks, or is this a very wide defined group of folks? I kind of get sketched out when I look at a Bible translation now, especially, and see it having a pretty specific, narrow translation team. This is kind of part of my issue with the English Standard Version. But I use the English Standard Version right now more than I use any other Bible translation. So I have some rules, but I'm completely, perfectly willing to break my rules. The same thing with that is, sometimes not the biggest fan of if one person did a Bible translation. We can talk about that being the Living Bible, Eugene Peterson's The Message, which is fantastic. But also the Passion Translation there's varying degrees of sketch in my mind about that. But Eugene Peterson was a fantastic biblical scholar, and his interpretation and his linguistic skills and that sort of stuff is just par for course. The Living Bible, like I said already, so many people met Jesus and experienced Jesus through this Passion Translation. I'm not gonna talk about that right now. But I've got times and situations where I'm willing to break my rules for other reasons, but also it's like, okay, I can get around this. I know enough to know where, okay, this is probably going to be a problem. This is why this might be here. What was really interesting is where I went to seminary at Asbury Theological Seminary, a lot of our professors were on the translation team for the New Living Translation, and that New Living Translation team, from what I remember, they had 3 academics or 3 primary translators on every single book, and they really tried to make sure they were all from 3 different theological backgrounds or schools or understanding or denominational traditions, that sort of thing. They tried to make it be varied. And I remember hearing Dr. Robert Mulholland, who I took New Testament and Revelation from, who was one of the translators for the book of Revelation, New Living Translation, talking about how there were specific translation issues and arguments and conversations that he was in with the other translators, and how they came to the decisions of, okay, this is the best way for us to translate this. And sometimes some of them got their thoughts, and sometimes the other ones didn't get their thoughts. So that whole thing, I want my translations to be from a pretty varied group of people. So that's kind of my 2 rules about translations. I want it to be wide. More people should be able to use this translation than fewer people should be able to use this translation. So that's rule 1, I guess, or kind of overarching assumption maybe. Rule 1 is, why was this Bible translated? Does it fill a specific gap in need? And then number 2, was this translation team diverse and big? I have pretty conservative understandings and expectations of Scripture and viewpoints of Scripture, but I also know there are people who I disagree with that hold to 90% of the same things I do, or 80%. That kind of stuff doesn't matter to me. If it matters to you, this is probably going to be a very different kind of thing. So I'm Chad Brooks. Thanks for sticking around. I'd love for you to just kind of pop in the comments, what you would like to hear more about. I've got a couple of different cool Bible videos I'm planning on doing, because I love this new space. This works great for video. So thanks so much for tuning in. I'd love to engage, talk to you in the comments, that kind of stuff. Let me know, what are your rules for Bible translations? I'd love to see that. Awesome. Make sure to like and make sure to subscribe. Hit that bell if you want to get more content like this. But I will see you next time around.